Rupert and Franco, thank you for being with us again today. We had a very popular event with both of you a week ago, talking about leadership in family business. And there were a lot of really interesting questions from the audience that we wanted to spend a bit of time with the two of you talking a bit more about. So thank you for being with us again today. Just for those people who didn't get a chance to hear from the two of you last time, I think it would be really valuable if you could say a little bit about who you are to start with and how you got into working with business owning families and leadership in particular. So Rupert, if I may hand over to you just to say a little bit about your background and your current work and how you got into this space.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, to you and to the IFB. It's always a pleasure to partner with you, and it's a great pleasure to be here with you and Franco. So I'm Rupert Phelps. I'm the partner leading family office services at Smith & Williamson, and I help families with their family governance, their family strategy, succession, and bringing in the next generation and all of those long-term strategic pieces. And I've been working with business owning families, both in the UK and internationally, for my whole career. Well, when I say that, my whole main career, because actually before that, I was in the army. And I never really spoke about that in my main career for various reasons. And I then got to meet the lovely Francesco Lombardo, Franco to his friends, about 6 or 7 years ago. And he said to me, he actually used quite a strong word. He said I wasn't being authentic about not talking about it because it was valuable experience. And I'm just quoting him, I'm not trying to boast for myself. It was valuable experience in helping work with families and nurture their young. Now, of course, that also relates to leadership, and it really opened my eyes. And I see that there is some valuable experience that I can bring to serve the families I work with. So that's just one reason to be glad to be on this call with Franco and you today.
Thank you very much. I may just ask you one question. What are the most important lessons that you learned about leadership being in the army?
Well, the most important one, Elizabeth, which might surprise you because it's against very much a widespread conception, is that it's not about the so-called vertical, hierarchical giving orders. It's absolutely not about that. And that is where leadership can actually be unpacked and become really a much more important sort of golden thread and golden blanket, note I'm using non-vertical language there, to help a family as it deliberates and plans for the long term.
Thank you. And Franco, over to you and your journey into family business and leadership.
So it's always a pleasure to speak with the both of you. So thank you, Elizabeth, for creating this. So I started on the wealth management business. I was very good at it, made a lot of money. And then I realized that the more money I was making, the more of a horrible person I was becoming. So I wanted to know what that was about. I hired a coach who I still work with to this day. And he helped me realize that I was using money as a tool to fill this huge gap of unworthiness and emptiness I had inside of me because of what happened to me as a child. And as I started to do that work, I started to realize that I was more fascinated in the actual emotional side of wealth than the actual management of it. I attended an event where I heard a very prominent Canadian family business member speak, and he was talking about the challenges he was having with his kids, with his siblings and his parents at the time, not about the trust issues of the business. And I realized that I had a skill set to solve those issues. I didn't know how at the time, but I knew I could do it. As I continued down my path of personal development, what I realized was that one of our fundamental needs as human beings is we want to feel safe. We want to feel safe in our environments, with our relationships, and certainly with our wealth. And it became apparent to me that most families do not feel safe with each other. So that's why I do what I do. I serve global business families across the world. And the best way to describe it is to help the human beings be nice with the other human beings who happen to be family members and potentially shareholders and co-employees.
Yeah, thank you very much. There's one question I want to ask both of you before we move into all the fantastic questions we had from our audience last time. And that is, how do you spot leadership talent in a family business where skill sets may be very different, and there are people who are in the business, people who are close to the business, people who are far away from the business? How do you spot leadership talent, and how do you make sure you don't miss any? Franco, maybe I can start with you.
Sure. I think leadership is one of those words that societally we attach to roles and titles. I believe leadership is a personal thing, right? Leadership is how we behave as human beings, how willing are we to be in integrity with ourselves? And my definition of integrity is we are connected to what we feel, we speak what we think, and we do what we say. So if an individual has those kind of capabilities innately or are willing to get groomed into those, that's the kind of stuff that I look for. I'm more interested in character than in education. Because character cannot be taught. It can be developed.
And
that's how I look for it.
Thank you. And how do you spot the ability to lead others? Because one thing is learning how to be leaders in our own lives, but how do you spot the ability to take that to a role where you're leading others as well?
So I go back to my comment around, wanting to feel safe, right? So leadership is about, inspiring and empowering others to take some kind of action. And in order to do that, they got to feel safe. They got to trust the leader. They got to trust you. But they're not going to trust you until you trust yourself. So the work that we do with families, we talk about creating individual safety, which is me, relational safety, which is you and I, and then familial safety, which is the three of us, right? So people will follow those that they trust, feel safe with, and that inspires them. And if that individual is doing the work on themselves, that will automatically create inspiration.
Thank you. Rupert, what's your recipe for being able to spot talent in a family business and also making sure you don't miss any just because it doesn't come packaged in the usual way?
Yes, and I'd just like to pick up on the last point Franco made there, which I like very much, which is the way you've tied in integrity and inspiring into leadership, which are just fundamental. And I mean, in a sense, one there is the quality of integrity, and then there's the function of inspiring. And it's very difficult to inspire people unless those people have a sense that there is some integrity in the person. And the two actually feed and grow on each other. And it's very important to remember about the person. And I mean, I sometimes like to quote one of the greatest British generals of the 20th century, Field Marshal Slim. He said, leadership is just plain you. There is so much in that, not least that it hints and shows both the integrity piece, but also that anyone potentially can have leadership drawn out of them, the real meaning of educare, drawn out of them, of education, and can find themselves in positions of leadership. I think that's very important. But back to your earlier question, Elizabeth, to me this hints and then reminds us of the environment in which a family is, how it looks at itself, how it considers itself, how it plans for the future. And depending on the nature of that environment, the ability for individual members to spot talent and nurture it and direct it will be changed enormously. Now, there are roles for the elders of a family, for mentors and mentees. Of course, I would say there is a role for external facilitation. All of these have their part potentially to play. I would also say it can begin very young, hopefully not in an off-putting way, but for example, philanthropy, we might have time to come on to that, in a small sense, explaining why it can be beneficial in the broadest possible sense, beneficial to the social good, but also to the giver, to actually be concerned more widely. All of these hint at talent and nurture and of bringing on those within the family. And I would just touch on my earlier point that it isn't about titles and hierarchy. Franco's so right that is off-putting. Everyone can have a part to play within a broader, more fluid definition of leadership.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I'd like to maybe stay with you, Rupert, and bring in the first question that we had from our audience. And that was, is the word leadership a divisive word in family business?
Well, I think it can be, as I said, because there can be the view of some crass war film where a harassed officer is saying, and that's an order, soldier. And I mean, if any officer or indeed anyone has ever had to say that to anyone more junior, then they clearly are not a very able leader. I'm now going to contradict what I just said to an extent, which is in the military context, almost anyone of any rank can find themselves in a leadership role at some point. A private soldier can find they have a leadership need in all sorts of situations, on operations or back at barracks. In a similar way, in a single family office, I like to point out there's no such thing as a back office role. given any member of a single family office staff may find themselves dealing with a family member. So I would say in a shortened sense, in that sense, they're no longer just a back office administrator. They're part of the client-facing team. So I think that when one considers this a bit more broadly, it can be really helpful. And I did touch on the concept of the vertical, that's a pictorial, or the blanket sitting there that is horizontal. I think when family members, perhaps facilitated or guided by people who've thought about this, can think more broadly, then it allows a slightly more fluid and engaging way for people to play a role in guiding, leading, if you will, at certain points as the family seeks to be organized for long-term success, which will involve facing challenge and working through it in a team-built basis.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And Franco, you've written about leadership, leadership in family business. What are your reflections on the word leadership in a family business context?
Well, as I said earlier before, leadership, like most words in any language, have subjective meaning to what people attach that meaning to. I use a simple example like elephant. Whenever I speak, I'm running a workshop for a family, I'll go around the room and say, okay, what is, if I see the word elephant, what comes to mind? So what comes to mind for you, Elizabeth, when I say elephant?
I see an image of the animal itself.
Okay. Rupert, how about you?
I think of your excellent book with that in the title.
Thank you very much. Well, what comes to mind for me when I say elephant is Dumbo. And in all the years I've been saying this, I've never had someone come up with that definition. And this is something that we can visualize with all experiences. Leadership, like value words like integrity, transparency, authenticity, are very ethereal. So when I say the word leadership, I'm going to have my perspective of what leadership is. So that could be a negative perspective of how I was treated by a teacher in a classroom. So now it's a negative point of view. So if someone says you're going to be a leader, ooh, I don't want to be that. I could have a perspective of, leadership is about abuse of power. Who wants to be that? So I think it's important to define, first of all, what leadership is for the individual. And what are the actions that prove that you're being that definition. So in a lot of the work that we do with families is we find that they have, lovely constitutions, lovely documents, sometimes with these words in there, values words, mission statements. But where is the definition of that? And more importantly, where is the action that proves you're living that definition? So how do I know I'm being a good leader? Because I operate with integrity, I'm vulnerable, I'm transparent. And the action is I inspire and empower transformation by being the transformation. That's how I know I'm being a good leader. So it's very clear on whether I'm being a leader or not. There's no gray area.
Do you think families benefit from defining what leadership means, not just to them as individuals, but to them as a family?
I think absolutely. It's clear because then they're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll give you an example from a values perspective. People say we need to respect each other. Okay, well, what does that mean? We're going to have 3 different definitions here for that word, let alone the action that proves that definition. So where families, in my opinion, need to do more work on, which is, by the way, the difficult work, yet it's so worth it, is the actionizing, putting into action, living what they say matters to them.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're going to be a leader in a family business, that's not something that you do at 8 a.m. on Monday and you stop it at 5 p.m. on Monday and you start again. It's how you live consistently through your life. You both know me as a friend. I'll consider both your friends of mine. You both know that I am consistent as a leader in my work, as I am in friendship, as I'm with my kids. That's what leadership is consistency.
That's a very valid point. And if I can just continue sort of thinking through what that means on a family level. So where should leadership be discussed is another question we had. Should it be the family council? Should it be the larger family group? Should it be the executives? Where should we be having these conversations with families?
Everywhere. It should start with the individual, right? And leadership, by the way, is we all have leadership capabilities in us. If we're a human being, we've got leadership capabilities in us. what's in the way of us stepping into that true leadership role is our conditioning, is our stories, all the stuff that happened in the past. Because as I've said before, everything we do as a human being, we do for a reason. Everything. It's either based on the past conditioning, or it's based on the future, or a sense of purpose, want to contribute, and our leadership capabilities. But we don't know what those extremes are unless we work with a trained facilitator or coach or guide or mentor. Right?
Have you seen examples of families who have found really meaningful ways of talking about leadership? Examples that you've visited?
I'm going to give an example, right? So, and I was just talking to, the head of a family office of a Greek family that I'm engaged in earlier today, right? And we're talking about, dad wants, the next generation to step up and be shareholders and be leaders in the family business, right? And they have to make it, they got to be committed. It's not something that I'm interested in. I'm not interested in, going in the army. I'm either committed to it or I'm not, right? And the conversation is evolving that the business doesn't need them. It's got professional managers to run a very successful business.
Mm-hmm.
Should they be committed to the path, they will become better people as a result of that commitment to something that's bigger than themselves, which happens to be the family business. So let me share a story with you. I got engaged by a client who I still work with to this day after 15 years. My very first family I've ever engaged with, I still have the privilege of serving them. And one day, dad comes to me and says, you know what, I'm thinking of making the boys shareholders. I said, Ronnie, that's a great idea, but there's two things you may want to consider. Number one, what's it going to be like to have playmates in your sandbox, playing with your toys, who happen to be your children? And number two, what if they don't like your toys? So I spent the year with each of the boys, coaching them, going back and forth, you in or you're out, you committed or you're not. And the oldest son realized that he was more committed to having a relationship with his brothers when he was 70, as he put it. I would rather go fishing with my brothers when I'm 70 and have a relationship with them than have worked with them and have no relationship. So he walked away from a significant level of assets because relationships mattered more to him. That is leadership. That's a phenomenal example of leadership in the family. Yet we focus on leadership of got to be a shareholder, got to be the chairman, got to be the CEO. That's a part of it. Leadership starts with self. That's why when I wrote the book, Safe Space, Governance and Action, governance starts with the individual. It's not some document that we crafted.
Thank you. That's a very powerful example you gave. Rupert, you've probably seen similar examples of families doing great things. And I just wondered, what are your reflections on the topic? How do you see it and what have you seen working really well?
Well, one of the most significant subjects, actually, Franco has just touched on at the end of his thoughts there, which is know thyself, as it's often rendered. And it reaches back in time. It's so old, no one quite knows. It's certainly inscribed on stonework in ancient Greece. And what that hints at, perhaps with Field Marshal Slim's Just Plain You, and then the integrity point, is fundamental. And it's something where it's difficult for a person on their own, through their own reflection, to make the whole journey to being some stage at that. But of course, the journey never ends. And that's where the collective power of being with a family that does have some interaction and perhaps is facilitated to maintain or improve or regain some of that is very important. I also think that when one unpacks a bit further leadership and thinks more broadly, there's another concept called leadership from behind. And again, that might sound strange to some people who are not familiar with it. But in a nutshell, it's really where, imagine a group are set a task in whatever environment, and just to themselves, their quiet voice in their head is, we did that, not they, he or she. You understand what I mean. And that is a very powerful example of perhaps quiet leadership. But to me, it hints at some of the aspects that Franco's talked about. It certainly hints at a very important area, which is taking responsibility for others. A leader that doesn't do that and isn't seen to do that is absolutely not showing leadership. That sense of responsibility, it makes one think perhaps of stewardship. That's a whole separate subject. But taking responsibility for others and being inclusive in that sense is a very important part of this. And I mean, I've seen examples of this both from families who've retained the sort of family version of a corporate memory, people who really understand the background of the family through a governance forum. Some would call it a council of elders, some call them other things, which is separate from a family council, maybe meets less often, but it's a sounding board to retain that. Is absolutely superb. I mean, there's a family known to IFB where until recently a family member was involved in some sense along those lines, who'd actually been working in their youth, where a colleague remembered the great crash of 1929. That sort of corporate memory is extraordinarily powerful, and then to promulgate to the younger generation. And what I would say is that the relationship between a mentor and a mentee, we've touched on those words in this call this morning. Another way I think for people to know themselves, if they are, for example, looking to be a mentor, is if they think they are going to learn from being a mentor and it'll be valuable to them, then they're much more likely to be able at this, the mentee, the mentor relationship. And again, that's a non-hierarchical view of a relationship that on paper might look very vertical.
Thank you both. I think it really speaks to something I read a few years ago about how leadership had up until recently been all about the leader, and now it was starting to become more about the ship, more about the collective, and actually more about the individuals who are part of that team, that business, that family. And sort of touched on mentorships and next generation a little bit. So I think that brings me to our next question, which is around the next generation and whether, in your views and in what you've seen, what would you recommend? Should next generation members be sent out into the world, learn lessons, make mistakes, find their feet in other businesses, perhaps even other industries, before possibly returning to the family business? We can all list a number of pros and cons, I suppose, but I would just be interested in your views on that, and also in maybe some examples of what you have seen working really well in both situations. Maybe Franco, if I can go to you.
Sure. So one of the things that I think we overlook as advisors and as family members is that when you look at the three-circle model of family business, you've got family, business, and ownership. The primary role is the role of parent. That's the primal role that will drive everything emotionally. And the tendency is to want to protect our children. We don't want them to suffer. We want to make life a little easier for them. So what happens is every family has what I call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which are the big issues that all families face. The first one is the fair versus equal conversation. Okay, I want to be fair and equal to my kids. In other words, I want to give them both a job at the firm or the outfit, and sometimes they're going to get paid the same regardless of what the role. Well, that's going to create resentment long term, right? There's an inequality there. It's nice on paper, can't be executed in business. The second one is the enable versus empowerment conversation. You know, I want to make things a little simpler for little Jimmy or little Sally because, you know what, they've got some special needs and they need a little special attention, right? So that enabling continues for life. I have a 50-year-old next-gener who's a spoiled brat, who's been enabled by his parents and his siblings for a long time, so much so that when he had an affair on his wife, who's his sister's best friend, and the family sold the business, he sued his father for his perceived 0.25% of the business, and his mother paid the legal bill on her husband. That's enabled them to a totally different level, as opposed to empowering them, helping them take accountability and taking responsibility. Then there's the burden versus responsibility. One day this will be yours. Burden versus, you know, would you like to be a part of? Do you choose this? Because this is not yours, you're a steward of it. A lot of families don't realize that owning a business is a stewardship. It's a form of leadership. We want to leave it in a better place. Yes, we get benefits from it. Yes, there's some perks, but it's not ours. You know, the All Blacks have a great saying, leave the jersey in a better place. And that feeds down to the next one. So responsibility, choose it. And the last piece is entitlement versus contribution. This will all be yours one day, creates that sense of entitlement versus how do you think you can contribute to this? What value can you bring? Can you make this better? So my question is, to answer your question is, which best serves the individual? Is working in the business going to serve them and address these issues, or not working in the business serve them? And it depends on the individual. There's no clear answer here.
Thank you. That's a very good answer. Rupert, maybe I can ask you what you have seen working really well, and what your recommendations would be if perhaps they're any different to what Franco just said.
Well, one of my first thoughts on this very important subject is travel, and that travel is one of the great mind openers and informers, education, and also ways in which people mature. And I mean, that might be assumed to be international travel, but I would also include travel within countries where there's variety for whatever reason. And therefore, in a general sense, this is enormously important for almost all people. I think there will be occasions where a sooner path into the family business might have justification. But generally speaking, external experience, whatever external means, can be enormously valuable. And I mean, I've seen, for example, in the sort of the UK domestic, very much the people on this call at IFB membership, whereby, for example, a business owning family in heavy engineering have done a swap, a secondment with another family who are manufacturing in a different sector, but in a very general sense. They've both got factories, they're real tangible operating companies, they've got local recognition, and they sort of expand their presence for the family and the awareness they've got in that way. That can be enormously powerful. Of course, that can happen internationally, and there might be family businesses that have got supply chains. There's a subject for lockdown another time, but where they've got links internationally where they can look to do this as well. But what I would say, I mean, there's another parallel I give you, is that the Geneva private banks, traditionally, members of those families would have to go and cut their teeth investment banking in Wall Street. So slightly similar to my example in some ways, activities which they wouldn't be active in when they went back to Geneva, but on the sense that it would be challenging. They would learn something about the capital markets and a different culture, a more frenzied atmosphere New York is than Geneva, for those that didn't realize that. And it really can be a very enriching thing, but it does need nurturing. It can't just be someone on their own. And that, again, is a place where a mentor or a family member or facilitator can be really valuable.
Yes.
And Liz, I just wanted to add one piece. You know, if the family chooses to have their next gen work within the family business, it has to be very, very clear that they are an employee of that business and they have a direct report that has the ability to fire them if they're not performing. Their last name does not cut them any slack whatsoever if they're an employee. They're either contributing or they're not. And that's where sometimes these fail, because the parent, which is the primal role, wants to protect their children from having a bad experience.
Oh, that's a very powerful point. And you both make some extremely good points. And maybe I can just add one of my own, because I've been talking to people about this for years, as we probably all have, because it's one of those questions that will always come up because it's really important to people. And one of the recommendations I heard one time was, you know, it's a good thing to send them out into the world, but sometimes it means they don't come back, because they don't necessarily know what to come back to. So the recommendation was to create some really powerful structured internships, or for the young shareholders, so that they actually get a real sense of the business as they're growing up, or they're still at school, or maybe they're just about to leave school, so that they don't get sent out into the world without having a sense of what they would potentially be coming back to. And I can see that would work really well, because if you don't know what the family business is all about, why would you feel connected to it? Why would you feel an attachment to it? But I think working for your family, and I speak from my own personal experience, can be a purpose and quite fulfilling in and of itself, just knowing that you're united around a common purpose as a family.
And the other piece, Elizabeth, if I may add to that, is the decision and desire to want to contribute to make something better.
Yes.
If that's not there, don't do it.
Yeah. That's a very...
Don't do it for the title and the perks. No, wrong driver.
And what you're both talking about here, really, I would say, is one of the supreme aims of seeking effective family governance. That's just a phrase I use quite often. I mean that in a very broad and in an unending evolutionary sense. And that is to have something about the governance arrangements, the atmosphere, the family, when and how it meets, that actually entices engagement and involvement. Now, it's much easier for me to say that sitting here, and there are all sorts of initiatives that can be put in place to help a family achieve that, especially for the next generations. And as we know, I mean, by the way, one might have an entrepreneur in their 70s or even older who've got two adult next generations wanting to become involved. And in Franco's wonderful anecdote, you know, looking at the sandbox and who or what is in it. But actually for a family to deliberate through the right leadership function, facilitation, and also surmount another issue which often isn't addressed so much, which is one family, even a nuclear family of one set of parents and children, may have very contrasting or sadly at odds values or cultures within it, let alone a family with a cousin consortium, as it might be called. And again, that's an area where some professional eyes might be helpful in uncovering some of those aspects that might have become the unspoken, dare I say it, Franco, elephant in the room.
That's a really good point. It brings me on to my next question, which is, how do you manage the tension of competitiveness between family members, especially if we're talking perhaps in terms of a leadership role in the family business? In some family businesses, it is accepted that you have to compete for the top jobs. But in other, perhaps slightly smaller businesses, that can really lead to a lot of family tension. How do you manage that? Maybe Rupert, you could continue, because you were kind of alluding to some of this already, I think.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we got close to something I did mean to say earlier, which is there are some functions where clearly there is an old-fashioned, dare I say it, hierarchical, the chair of the family council or a given board. I mean, clearly that has formal aspects, and governance requires that, and that is something that I would say is neither good nor bad. It's how it's executed. In terms of looking at the wider point you're talking about, I think that where a family does have an ongoing sense that it's learning, that it's evolving, that it can include new elements. I mean, one parallel that I actually did mention on our previous call, but I'll repeat it in case people missed that, was where the third sibling, they were G3, their elder siblings of the G3 are very, very high achieving, I mean, real sort of golden boy, golden girl, as they might be called in some cultures. And this person just liked drawing, and their siblings just dismissed them, thought they were absolutely a waste of time. And then to make this quick, there was a suggestion of a private family website, and it needed the artwork. And this person was also, they were quite a quiet person. They were quite techie. I'm not suggesting the two always go together. Anyway, this person then created pretty much everything for the family website. This was some time ago, it's 9 years ago, a secure site with family trees, with secure archive of documents and family footage. And suddenly, well, not suddenly, very quickly, these siblings really respect that person that they've been really quite harsh and tough to. And their element, let's call it leadership, because in some sense it absolutely is on this call, have been discovered and nurtured and plays a really important role in that family. So I would say it can come from unexpected places. And back to, I mean, as Franco said, everyone has something in them that can come to play in this, but it does need to be identified, nurtured, encouraged, and engaged.
Thank you. And Franco, if I can ask you the same question.
So I think the question, you know, is goes back to what is leadership and what is the function of leadership. And my definition of that is to serve a group of individuals and inspire them towards a common goal. And in order to do that, there has to be a strong desire and commitment to contribute. So the question is, what are you willing and capable to contribute? And if you can answer that, you shouldn't be in the role. You shouldn't even be considered, right? And if you don't know, then, and you want to find out, then commit to the journey. Commit to exploring. Maybe I can contribute this. Maybe I can contribute that. Rupert, that was a great example. Here's someone that's an artist, and they made an incredible contribution to the family business.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's about, and typically that's what I call the hidden talent that people dismiss because, someone is quirky, or they don't communicate better, or they don't dress a certain way, or they don't come prepared to meetings. Right? It's about determining who are they there to serve? And if you're not there to serve, if you're not there to serve, then no.
There's a fascinating concept, which is the servant king, and I'm sure you're thinking about it, Franco. It exists in various cultures, of which the Christian is the most obvious, but it also has other applications, and the sense of sacrificial leadership, which of course ties in with not being boastful, with taking responsibility, with leadership from behind. And to me, the point about it is it shows connection. It's not just about one person that says something almost in an island. It's about connection and up and down. And that also points to the importance to delegate. Genuine leaders understand that they need to build a team, motivate them and empower them, and have a fluid movement between who takes roles. And delegation is just fundamental to that. My favorite example of that, which I can't claim to know directly from a client, sadly, since it's in history, was Admiral Nelson, who had his band of brothers. They were all brothers then. And just to remind you, Nelson was killed about a third of the way through the Battle of Trafalgar. But his team knew what to do. And that extraordinary victory against considerable greater odds happened with him dead because the team knew what to do under his leadership, but empowered to lead themselves.
Fantastic point. Thank you. And I have one final question for both of you, and that is one piece of advice that you would give to the current or senior generations who are responsible for developing leadership in the family business, perhaps in the next generation specifically. What one piece of advice would you give to them, and what one piece of advice would you give to the next generation who are perhaps looking to be considered for leadership roles in the future in the family firm? Franco, if I can come to you first for that.
Sure. It's the same piece of advice for both, actually, because both are human beings, right? We tend to think of our senior generation leaders as these larger than life individuals, and some of them are, and they've done great things, they've created great wealth, and at the end of the day, they're human beings, right? And we see these next gen as these young, insecure, labeled, and they're human beings too. So my piece of advice to both sets of humans is to be willing to get vulnerable with yourself and be honest with yourself and share that with yourself and each other. In other words, create a safe space for yourself and each other, because once you have safe space, particularly in a relationship, you can achieve incredible things that you never knew was possible.
That's a very good point. Thank you. And actually, I would like to add one question to this before we move on, and that is, what one piece of advice would you have liked someone to give to you as you were starting out in your career?
To stop lying to myself. To just get honest. And that includes, had I been honest with myself about the relationships that I got into, I would have saved myself millions of dollars. I would have saved myself incredible amount of heartache. Now, having said that, I'm incredibly grateful for my experience, because those experiences made me to the man, father, friend, advisor I am today. But had I been told to stop lying to myself early on, who knows what could happen.
Thank you. That's a very courageous answer. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Rupert, same questions to you. Advice to the senior generation, the next generation, and one piece of advice you wish someone had given you at the start of your career.
Thank you. And as anyone listening to this call knows, Franco and I are very aligned in lots of ways, and I espouse to his first question. very much what he said, and my answer is close to that, and I agree with it, everything he said, but my articulation would be this, and that is for a family to acknowledge different forms of capital. And by that I mean that the family capital is composed of various forms, of which the financial capital has no intrinsic value. And that means people articulate these in varying ways, but I call it the human, intellectual, social, and spiritual, that these are not just important, but intrinsic. And through much of what we're talking about, knowing oneself, looking at leadership, looking at nurture, engagement, and absolutely what Franco is saying about integrity and safe space and dialogue, when a family looks at that, having accepted it's valuable, and then deliberates on it, and then continues, because this is evolutionary and teaches one to learn and never stops, then it will be enormously strengthened to face adversity, and it will be much stronger when change happens, both unforeseen or predictable if one doesn't actually know the timing, which is change through decision making or even death of others. So that's my first answer. My second answer is in a way a dangerous sounding glib, in that I wish I'd thought about that area sooner and read more about it earlier, because I really have found it to be one of the keys to unlock discussions with families, and how a professional such as I would go about that, of course, should be matched and tailored, sometimes quite markedly different in different situations and at different stages. But I suppose a wider question, which I think you were asking, Elizabeth, and my response is to have the continual hunger and, dare I say it, humility to learn and to seek to learn from individuals, from books, from people who've gone before who are respected, and also acknowledge that that is an unending process.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, both of you, Rupert, Phelps, Smith & Williamson, Francesco Lombardo, Veritas Family Office. Thank you for the conversation that we've just had now, and thank you very much for your support of the IFB. And I appreciate that greatly. I know that if people want to find out more, you would both be very happy to hear from them, and your biogs are on our website, and we can certainly help facilitate the introductions. So I hope that our listeners, wherever they might be, have enjoyed the conversation as well. Should there be any questions, we would all be really happy to take them. I'm sure that you would both be open to that as well. So with that in mind, thank you so much. If you are listening to this and you're new to the IFB and you want to find out more about us, you can find us at ifb.org.uk. There are tons of resources on our website, including written articles by both gentlemen on this interview today and others. And we also have a series of interesting events coming up that you might like to check out. Thank you very much to everyone, and I look forward to being with all of you again soon.
Thank you.